Welcome back to another episode of Right Here in Mass. Joining me today is Chris DiBella, the founding partner of DiBella Law, Injury, and Accident Lawyers. Few attorneys are able to understand and relate to the hardships accident victims suffer. Chris remembers vividly as a child receiving the no call no one ever hopes to receive that his older brother was involved in a life-threatening car accident. He remembers the impact the accident had on him and his family, which has led him to starting his own firm, DiBella Law, Injury, and Accident Lawyers. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ashley. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it as well. I'd love to start off by having you share more about you and what you do with our listeners.
Sure. So I've been practicing law for a little over 21 years now. We focus on personal injury law, which is really anybody that's been injured as a result of somebody else's negligence. So it really takes on a lot of different life forms. So it could be, the things that you and I might know about, you hear on TV, like the car accidents, truck accidents, motorcycle, dog bites. But we even have cases where there's been, accidental gun discharges that have injured people to, slipping and falling on ice, to medical malpractice, to being injured at work. Pretty much any injury you sustain and somebody else is responsible for it is the case we would handle.
Yeah. And so I know from your bio and from your website that it sounds like you had a personal experience that opened you up into this world or this specific sector in law. And so I would love to hear more about that and really what inspired you to pursue this as a career.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm fortunate that I'm at the point in my life where I love what I do, and it really grew from a place that early on, as you said in the intro, my brother was involved in a car accident. He was driving across the street on a bike, and he was hit by a car, and I was the one that picked up the phone at home and handed it off to my father, and it was very traumatic. I came from a very blue collar working class family. Very stressful for my parents to deal with all the medical bills and the insurance company calls and debt collectors. And, so that really stuck with me. And, my parents, my father in particular, he was in construction and he was big on pushing me into the law. So even when I was a young kid, he literally went into a law library, took out a tort book and brought it home. Now it was gibberish to me at the time because I was a young kid, but so he was always the driving force behind trying to get me into the law. And he really saw it as a way that you could help people. Because again, being in construction, he's been injured on the job, and he's had to deal with, employers that maybe didn't have the best working conditions and things like that. And, his parents immigrated here. So it was really a way that you could do good in a community. And, and that's really, we've carried that into our firm today.
Oh, I love it. And I think that having that personal why or mission behind it likely drives a lot of the reason for why you do what you do and really helps to keep things going, remembering why you got started in this role or in this career in the first place.
Yeah, it really does, because it's so hard because I think we're constantly fighting the stigma that, personal injury lawyers are up against out there. And really, we take cases with no guarantee of an income or fee, and we're going up against very large, well-funded insurance companies. And really, in my eyes, they're the villains, right? They're the ones that they make money by paying victims as little as possible. And it's our job to make sure that we're getting our clients as much as is available and that they deserve. So, my staff and the people that work here and really get a firsthand seat at what we do, they love coming to work. They love helping clients. They love seeing what we can provide and really change a family's life in these really terrible times that they're going through. So you can't help but love it once you get deep into it.
Totally. And I'm curious to hear when you had like graduated from law school and entered this career, or did you work for another law firm first before starting your own firm, or did you go full force and right into starting your own?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, it's funny because I have two kids right now in college, and, they don't know what they want to do. And, it's hard to know from a young age for sure what you wanted to do, and I left law school. I'm sorry, I left undergrad. I went into law school, didn't know for sure if I was ready for it, went and got my MBA, worked for a little bit doing management consulting. Then I went back for my law degree because I was like, you know what, I really did like it. I did love the material. So I went back a couple years older and had a different appreciation for it. And while I was there, I got exposure working in the district attorney's office. I worked for, varying size law firms. And when I came out, I did the same thing. And then at some point, after working, many hours, I remember working in Boston, getting in at 7:30 in the morning, leaving at 7, 8 o'clock at night, dealing with that commute. You're like, wow, I could be doing this for myself,
Hmm.
but I'm logging in all these hours for somebody else. And that was where I decided. Fortunately, I didn't have kids at the time. I had a very supportive spouse, and they, encouraged me to take the leap of faith, and I did. And then it's just slowly built up over the course of the next 20 years from there. But that's kind of how. So I did have some background working at other firms for sure, which was very helpful, and eventually led me to working for myself.
That's amazing. And I'd like to go more into that because a lot of our listeners are in that space themselves, or maybe they have like a 9 to 5 through an employer and are thinking about starting their own business that haven't yet, or they actually do have a business. It's more of like a side hustle while they work their 9 to 5 and hopefully take it full time. And so I would love to hear your advice and your perspective on what you found worked for you with being able to just go all in on working for yourself.
I think one of the biggest misconceptions that people have is like, I'll go work for myself. I make my own schedule. Well, you're tied to it's really your identity. You walk
Mhm.
around with it 7 days a week. The difference is if you're passionate about it, like we talked about it, and you love it, like I do, it doesn't feel like work all the time.
Mhm.
I definitely would encourage people to do it. I think there's a lot of there's a lot of stressors that you don't have at a regular 9 to 5 job. You're not tasked with bringing in the work. You have a function, you serve it. But there's a different level of satisfaction you get when, you're able to see something that, I remember my very first office space, wondering how I was going to pay for the phone bill and a copier and my first employee, and somehow you kind of fight through all these next stages, and you grow and it works out. But watching something that you've created grow and blossom, there's nothing like it.
Mhm.
And it kind of really invigorates you to keep moving forward. But it's a lot of hard work. But I can tell you, having worked for myself for 20 years, I could never go back to working for somebody again. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a completely different experience, and I would really encourage anybody that's considering it. It's always going to be a leap of faith, right?
Hmm.
Because you're not going to have all the answers. There's no guarantees, but you're investing in yourself. And I've gotten to do some really cool things that I would otherwise never been able to do. I've supported
Yeah.
group functions during COVID where we were on the news. We bought, therapy dogs for schools. We've done massive Spartan races with the team. We've gone on duck boat tours. We've all these things, these that we want to support. We're able to support these great community events, and we're in charge. We decide
Hmm.
that, and that's not something I would be able to do if I was at a company. I would just be the one going along for the ride. So, what I would encourage people, if they have that passion, you'd much rather spend the time doing it in something you love, because the 9 to 5 gets old when you don't love going to work every day.
Yeah, exactly. And I love what you've shared too about just the access to opportunities that you wouldn't have had otherwise, and being able to accomplish really cool things because you had built something, and especially what you've done throughout these 20 years. And so I'm also curious to hear, since you had started the firm 20 years ago, how it's changed in that time. If you could talk about like how it's grown or changed
Yeah.
or really evolved.
It really, so again, from that, so I was fortunate. I had worked for a firm when I was in law school. And, one of the biggest things is having good mentors and having people that believe in you. Even, when you're on your own, you don't really have that higher level associate or manager to go to.
Mhm.
And I had somebody that just said, you know what, Chris, I know you're going out on your own. They had an office already. Just come in, use an office. Don't worry about paying me. Once you get up on your feet, and you can pay me, then we'll readdress it. But, and it didn't take very long, but I was able to pay him some rent a few months after that. But having that comfort allowed me to kind of take that first step. So being in that small office, working off just one phone with no employees, with no real, equipment or supplies to, running to Staples as you needed things and could afford to buy them.
Hmm.
It seems like an eternity ago, but that's how I started. And now, we have 5 office locations, a bunch of employees, we offer benefits, things that I couldn't imagine when I first started. And
Hmm.
it just kind of happens organically. And the thing that you realize in growing a firm is that when you hire good people and they believe in your vision and what you want to do, then you're not in it alone anymore, right? You're not just a
Yeah.
guy helping to bring in clients to, to really grow the practice. And having really good people is really the solution to all the success, really, because you can't do it without them.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that you brought that up because that's one thing I'd like to hear more about from your perspective as well as how you've been able to find the right people who, like you said, really care about what you do as much as you do,
Right.
who can help grow. So I think that might be a struggle for some business owners is they just worry about letting go of control and trusting in someone else to really drive the business forward in the way that they would like it to go. And so I'm just curious to hear how you found that to work for you.
That's a really great question because it's not been easy, and there's been a lot of trial and error and figuring out what works and what doesn't work, and making mistakes and learning from them. Um, you know, Once I really, and this was deep into the process, really knew what our identity was as a firm, what was important to us, and really honing in on the culture here. And what I mean by that is I used to, when I worked in the corporate world, I used to every Sunday night dreaded I had to go to work the next day. It was like,
Mhm.
the weekend's over. And now I never get that anymore. And it's in very large part to the fact that A, I love what I do, and I also love seeing the people when I come into the office. So when we interview for people, culture is probably at the top of what we look for.
Mhm.
Are you the right fit? All of those other things, the work ethic and, are you reliable? And, what's your resume look like? Do you have the experience? That's all somewhat important, but a lot of people, anybody can learn to be good at something if they're hardworking and they're intelligent. So to me, the culture is one of the biggest things, and we're very protective of that here. So, we're very slow to hire, but we're quick to fire. And I hate to say that.
Yeah.
It's the thing I like to do the least. But if you don't fit and you're going to detract from my A players and bring them down, because really one bad employee can really infect a whole office. And so that's why we really push culture. We make sure it's the right fit. We have a 90-day probationary period. And if it's not the right fit, then we just, politely and professionally part ways. But, we are fiercely, fiercely protective of that culture.
Yeah, and I think that's important to what you shared, not only to protect the other team members, but also like the client and their experience who are going through something difficult and challenging. You want to make sure that they feel supported and taken care of with people that they can depend on.
100%. I mean, one of the biggest features that every one of my staff has is they're very empathetic, and they can relate to what people are going through. They deeply care, so they're not rushing people off the phone to get to the next job, to the next task. They're not just a file, and that happens in every industry, right? And the bigger you get, it becomes harder to maintain that. And I think we're kind of in that sweet spot where, we're not, just a mill where we're running through cases, but we're not the solo either. And, we've got a good group of people that really are aligned with creating the best client experience that we can.
Absolutely. And on the topic of building a team, now that you mentioned that you have several employees and 5 offices, I'm curious to hear what your role is now within the law firm. If you've taken more of like a CEO approach and kind of look at like the high level growth and business development, or if you're still really involved in the day to day and the caseloads with your clients.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and so I started going to a law firm growth conference, which is it's been very helpful because one of the things they don't teach you in law school, and I did go to business school, is that they don't teach you. They teach you how to be an attorney, how to, what the law is, but they don't teach you how to grow, because it's a business at the end of the day.
Hmm.
And they don't teach you that. And they don't teach you how to manage personnel and track their metrics and make sure that everyone's hitting their benchmarks. And, so that has really been helpful. And that's allowed me to really step out of the day to day and manage the overall processes within the corporation. So I've learned to work more on the business and less in the business in the last few years, and that's been very important because I've also struggled for many years of balancing doing both. And when you're balancing doing both, you have all what I would do is I'd have all these great ideas, and I would never get to them. I say, let's do this, let's do this. My wife, I'd come home, my wife's like, that's a great idea. You're never going to be able to do it until you can hire somebody to do it and then work with them to accomplish some of these community initiatives or, implementing different, technological pieces that enhance the client experience, which we're big on. It's too much when you're trying to manage that day-to-day caseload and you're trying to manage employees. So this has really allowed me to step back, take a bigger look at what's going on and how to really attack growing the business.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's important is what you share to just remember that you're not only focusing like on the business or not being in the business, but on the business, really taking that time to have more of like the higher level, bigger picture thinking so that way you can take your business to the next level. Because it can be hard to balance the two when you're so focused on the day-to-day client work and whatnot to just be able to have the headspace and time and energy to look elsewhere.
It's well said, and it's probably the biggest impediment to why people don't grow is
Hmm.
because they're so busy. One of the greatest quotes that I heard is that you're better off hiring somebody because everybody's fearful that nobody can do it as well as them. Clients come here because of me, but you're better having somebody that can do your work 80% as good as you. That frees you up 100% of the time to do other
Hmm.
things. And that falls back on, listen, we got to have good training and protocols and retraining. You can't just train somebody once. You have to monitor them and make sure that they're following up and holding steadfast to the ideals that we have. But, I fall back on, also hire for your weaknesses. There are a lot of people out there that are just much better at different things than I am. And I just, get some, provide some insight, can offer some things, but you can't do it all. You
Hmm.
cannot, in running a business, you can't market, sell, do the work, do the accounting. So you're going to need to branch out at some point, take that risk.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good reminder. Find someone who can do 80% of your work so that you can open it up 100% of your time. I think that's important. Like time is money. And so as an entrepreneur, having extra time in your schedule is huge for being able to focus on other things that will move the needle forward and bring you closer to reaching your goals.
Yeah, well, listen, if your end goal is we want to help as many people as possible, then I have a cap what I can do.
Hmm.
But if we can train people and, to your point, a lot of people get stubborn in the fact that they just think nobody can do it as well as me. So I'm just going to do what I can do. And
Yeah,
that's going to dramatically limit what you're able to accomplish if you're a growth mindset. A lot of people are not, and that's okay as well. But
totally.
that just doesn't, our vision is to help as many people as we can.
Absolutely. And on that note, I would love to hear more about where you see your law firm going in the next year. If there's anything new or upcoming that you're working on that you can share or anything
Sure.
exciting happening.
Yeah, we really are big at trying to embrace technology. So, and we have been for a long time. So, it started off years ago where we have, a smartphone and Android and iPhone app where people can log, literally if they get into an accident, they can take pictures, they can find access to ride share right from there, they can find the nearest hospital. But then throughout the process, they can also track out-of-pocket expenses, they can journal about their injuries, they can schedule appointments, they can communicate with us. And so that's something that we've always been big on the client experience. And what we've kind of advanced that to more recently is I don't know if you've ever ordered a Domino's pizza, right? But they have the Domino's tracker, which my kids,
Yeah.
they know from the second it goes into the oven, when it's being prepped to when it's on the road, where it is. So we've created this client portal. So it's kind of the same idea. And clients can log in and see where their case is, at what stage. And they can
Mhm.
also watch some FAQ videos to see, okay, I'm in, the obtaining medical records and bills phase. What does that mean? How long does it take? What are the attorneys and staff doing? And so there'll be, some written FAQs, there'll be some videos from different members of the staff. So it's, really, it's multifaceted. It takes the influx of calls out from the staff with questions that we can routinely answer through videos, but it also just gives people that they want instant information. That's the world we live
Mhm.
in. So we've really pushed to integrate that in every phase that we can.
I love that. I think communication and transparency are huge for being able to retain clients and provide a really good experience. But also to your point, I mean, it's saving your staff a lot of time with not having to field all these calls and emails and questions that may be coming through. So, like you shared, I think it's mutually beneficial for both your team and for the clients of feeling like they're supported.
And the one tough part is, a lot, and we talked to a lot of attorneys, and unfortunately, one of the main drivers for cases that we get are from clients that left other law firms. That, to your point, there's no communication, there's no follow up, and we
Mhm.
have a very strict, we get back same day, even if it's just to say, let's make an appointment for you tomorrow, but you're going to hear from us same day. With that being said, people don't want to invest in the tools they need to enhance the client experience, the different technologies, the different, whatever it is. And the problem is because that it doesn't immediately drive business, right? People, they want to spend money on marketing because it might bring in a case, but they're not looking at, am I keeping the clients happy so that they're going to refer us to somebody else? They're going to come back if they need an attorney again. So it drives it just not the same way, but there's nothing more important than client satisfaction. So, and I think all clients now that are able to DoorDash food to their doorstep, to order, Christmas presents, they can get groceries. This is now trickling down into our industry, and there's an
Mhm.
expectation. If we can't keep up with that, we're going to fall behind.
Yeah, and especially too in the nature of the work that you do, where it's more vulnerable and very sensitive and personal. It's like people especially want that extra support to know that they're being taken care of as they're going through a probably difficult or challenging time in their life because of the situation.
Yeah, and that's also why I think we're kind of in a unique spot because there's certain things that you can't, that still you have to keep sacred to human interaction, right? We
Hmm.
cannot automate or use AI to do a client call or a client intake because it is too deeply personal, right? People are very vulnerable. They've been injured, a family members, maybe passed away, and that cannot be automated. So you
Hmm.
do need to have a very empathetic, knowledgeable staff that is going to be always client facing in those areas.
Absolutely. And on the topic of working with clients who are going through difficult situations or moments, I can imagine that can probably sometimes take almost like maybe an emotional toll on you just with like the severity of the situation. And so I'm curious to hear if you kind of have like your own process for almost like separating your work from your personal life so that way it doesn't bleed over, if that makes sense.
It does, and I probably am guilty of letting it bleed over more than it should because,
Hmm.
and so is the staff for better or worse. And we do a lot of company outings so that we can all decompress. And we just recently went on a duck boat tour. We've been axe throwing, believe it or not, as a law firm. We've done some things that allow people to step away from the heaviness,
Hmm.
but it is tough. And I think that's kind of what makes our firm unique and stand out is that people probably do care and don't turn it off because maybe we do get a little too animated with an insurance company or an opposing counsel because we really do personalize our clients. But you really do have to take the time, like you're a runner and that's a great outlet. I am into health and fitness and I do like to get different outlets like that are very stress relieving. But I think the biggest thing that we do is we rely on each other. We vent. The staff has definitely cried and broken down, and just leaning on each other because we know what each other's going through. But it's hard to separate as well as I think when I was working in the district attorney's office, it was easier to compartmentalize. But when you're dealing with families and children and loss of loved ones, it's hard to turn that off as easily.
Yeah, especially because I can imagine there may be some circumstances where clients and their families may be like projecting their emotions onto your team, and just even like navigating that as well as like knowing that it's just what they're going through. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing a poor job. It's just sometimes people react in certain ways because of the severity of a situation.
Oh, absolutely. It's high stress. And when they
Yeah.
first call, oftentimes that's the first time anybody's ever spoken to an attorney, right?
Hmm.
So even that is stressful and they don't know what they're going to get. They've probably heard some horror stories where certain attorneys are not very approachable or don't have a great bedside manner, and you want to kind of strip back everything and just be a human and really just get to the point where we're just having a conversation. Tell me what's going on, how I can help you. Let me break this down in as easy term to digest as possible. And that's it's hard, but it's important. You can't speak to clients in legalese and talk over them, and you really have to humanize it. And after having done this for as long as we all have, collectively well over 100 years in this office, everybody knows the life cycle of a case. They know people come stressed. They know how to deal with it. There is a form of therapy that we're conducting early on, and some people are very good at it,
Hmm.
and they're good because they care.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, you have 5 offices. Fun question. Do you think you'd ever expand to 6 or more?
100%. That's
Yeah.
definitely on the horizon. It's a weird thing. I'm very involved in, Google Analytics and SEO and pay-per-click and LSAs and TV and billboards. And, again, you go on Google and you
Mhm.
say, hey, I'm hungry for pizza. It's going to bring the pizza shop that's closest to you. It's not going to give
Yeah.
you one that's great, that has reviews, but it's 45 minutes away. And it's the same thing with the law office. Even though since the pandemic, behavior patterns have changed dramatically and people are meeting just like you and I are today over Zoom, less people come into the office. But the way people find you, it's very important to be accessible and available to them. And you could be the best lawyer, you could be the best, pizza place, hair salon. If people don't know about you and you're not close enough for them to even want to come see you, they're not, that you're not going to be found. So
Mhm.
it's multifaceted on why we're doing it. But partly is we're growing and it's just the natural progression. And part of it is, this is a way that you kind of have to expand and scale.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think you've shared yet. Where are your other locations? I know you mentioned Methuen, but where are the others?
Yeah, so we're in Boston, right on Mass Ave in the heart of Boston, which is a great location. We're in Methuen, Burlington, Andover, and Portsmouth, New Hampshire. So we
Nice.
do service all of New Hampshire as well.
Oh, that's awesome. And for anyone who's listening to this episode who is interested in pursuing a career in law, what advice would you have for them for getting into the industry specifically?
You know, follow your heart. I just recently spoke at Suffolk Law School in Boston, and it was great because there were a ton of undergrad and law students, all with the same types of questions that you're talking about. And I can tell you that the practice of law, at least in my experience, and I've done a lot of different things. I've done criminal law, I've done divorce, I've done real estate, I've done personal injury. All we do now is personal injury, but you're able to help people in ways that is so fulfilling that you just don't find in many other careers. In the panel that I was on, there was somebody that was doing immigration law, and you can imagine
Mhm.
this day and age the difference you can make in somebody's life with everything that's going on in the news. In criminal law, in divorce, these are all kind of high stress, difficult times that you individually can make a very different, you can change the path of someone's life.
Mhm.
We had a young boy that at the last attorney, they were offered $5,000, suffered very horrific damages, and the insurance company didn't want to pay anything. The opposing counsel wasn't offering anything. And he had some significant deficiencies that without the right amount of money and resources, he was not going to be able to correct them. And years later, and getting involved and having to take it to court and pursue litigation, we get over $500,000 for this boy, which is when he started at 5,000 is life changing. And
Mhm.
when you see the mom say, "Well, I already know the physicians I've researched that I'm going to Washington, D.C., that can help him with the needs that he has. And that wasn't possible before. I have just not found another job that provides me with that level of, I can't wait to work on the next case. I mean, that's just the
Yeah.
way it is.
Yeah, I'm sure it reminds you, like moments like that remind you why you do what you do. Like when things get hard, it's like thinking about the really great outcomes you were able to get for your clients. That's probably what helps to keep you going.
Yeah, I mean, listen, law school is not easy. You know, they say when you go into it, look to the person to your left, look to the person to your right. One of them's not going to be there, in a couple months because it's the first year at least is high stress. But, anyone can do it, just like
Hmm.
running a marathon, right? It's if as long as you're willing to put in the work and do the miles each week, it might seem daunting initially to run 26.2 miles, but if you have a schedule, you stick to it, you believe in yourself, then you definitely can get there. And that's what it's all about.
Yeah, absolutely. And now for a fun question. I always love to ask our guests what their favorite local businesses are to support. So I'm curious to hear what yours might be.
We have a lot. We're very involved with the Lawrence Boys and Girls Club over here by our Methuen office. We have Youth in Crisis over by our Boston office. We have done throughout the summer, one of the things that the staff loves the most, I don't never have a problem getting people to sign up and volunteer, is we've done things from raising, toy drives to coat drives to diaper drives, formula drives, coat drives. Any way we can give back, and pretty much we're involved in the communities where all of our offices are. And especially around the holidays, we're doing a big thing. We just started a partnership with Boston University men's hockey and Agganis Arena in Boston. And we're going to be going, filling a cruiser with toys as we approach toys and food as we approach the holidays. There's a lot of people in need, and we're providing skating opportunities to youth hockey programs that ordinarily would never get an experience like that, to go skate in a big arena in difficult neighborhoods. And so really opening the doors and providing experiences for people that otherwise wouldn't have them is something that's at the heart of our office.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. And a good shout out too to all those different organizations.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Chris, this has been such a good episode, and I've so enjoyed having you on the show to
Yeah,
share everything you've done at your law firm. And I'd love to have you share with our listeners where they can find you online in case they'd like to connect.
that would be great. You can reach us at everycasespersonal.com. We are on all of the different social media platforms. You can find us under DiBella Law, Injury and Accident Lawyers on Facebook, on Instagram, TikTok. But just you can go to our website, and if there is anybody, and I truly mean this, if there's anybody that's considering going to law school, has a question about running any type of business, marketing, scaling, technology, reach out, send me an email. You can send us an email at contact@dibellalawoffice.com. And I have been so grateful and blessed to have had mentors in my life take 10 minutes, a half hour, an hour. And I certainly am willing to pay that forward. So if anybody out there does have a question, and we will respond, don't hesitate to reach out.
Awesome. I'll make sure to include those places in the show notes that our listeners can easily find you from there. But thank you so much again for coming on this week's episode.
Thank you, Ashley.